everybody, and welcome to another episode of CI Diaries. I'm Kristy Placido.
And I'm Carrie Toth, and we are here today with our guest, Luke Worthington. We always ask you during the podcast, do you have questions for us? And Luke did. He sent us a question about assessment, and it just happened to be on a day that we had recorded our last podcast, which was based on assessment. So Luke had some follow-up questions, and we thought that we would invite him to be our guest today on the podcast to talk more.
Yeah, so welcome, Luke. We're so happy to have you here with us.
Thank you so much.
And so, Luke, you're very welcome. And what I would like for you to tell us to start out is just what prompted you to want to reach out to us?
Well, frankly, my district is moving to more proficiency-based assessments, and we've just been kind of playing with different assessments, different ideas of how to assess, and I wanted to reach out and ask about what are good proficiency assessments? What do those actually look like in comparison to maybe some old grammar-based assessments? Mm-hmm. And we also were gonna talk about the number of assessments we might need in order to have valid data, and how long do those assessments look like? And so more specific questions on mm-hmm. what types of assessments we should have.
So you were probably pretty surprised to find out that we had just recorded an episode on assessment when you reached out to us.
Yes, I was, and I
we
thought, I should listen to that one first.
Yes.
So.
So now that you've had a chance to listen to that episode, what are some questions that you have for us?
Well, so, when I was listening to the podcast, one of the first things that came to mind, and especially for people who are transitioning to more ADI-based instruction, is how many pieces of evidence, both formative and summative, would someone need to have, should they have, in their gradebook to justify the student's grade accurately? How many listenings, how many readings, how many writings, how many speakings? Because I think that should be the first question, because that might help other people decide how to design their ADI or CI-based instruction.
Mm-hmm. I love it. It's a great question. And I think that the truth and the answer is that it doesn't matter how many times you weigh the pig. That doesn't make the pig grow any faster. And so if we spend all of our time assessing, we're taking away from the time that we would have to work with our students and to give them input and opportunities to use what they've learned just in the classroom in different content and topics.
Yeah, I think a lot of teachers have a specific requirement by their administration. Like, we want to see at least 3 things in the grade book each week. And so obviously if you have a requirement like that, you're going to have to adapt to that. Personally, I didn't do assessments super frequently. I would say maybe like every 4 to 6 weeks, I would do a summative assessment. I did little more formative assessments throughout my unit, and my units were usually kind of built around a reader. And I would often combine a couple of modes in one assessment. So, I mean, almost kind of like a mini IPA. So, like, I might have them do something interpersonal, and I might also have them do just a listening. So I didn't assess the same way every single time. It was always just something different, and sometimes just maybe we had been kind of working on something in class, and I just wanted to see where they were in their own acquisition process. So, and to me, that's the whole point of doing a formative assessment, is just to get a good read on how your students are doing, and are they actually making progression toward your goals.
And when you look at when you look at our national data, it shows us that most students are able, in listening and reading, they're able to get up into that intermediate mid-level by the time they're finished with 4 years of language study. But those writing and speaking, they kind of border on the intermediate low, mid to just solid intermediate low. And that's really just putting together a series of sentences. So our expectation is that we want them to be doing, in an acquisition driven classroom, a series of sentences is like, so I want my students to be doing paragraph level things.
Yes.
So I really need to make sure that the units are full of content so that they're able then to produce at that paragraph level at the end. So I'm with Kristy. I probably every 3 weeks or 4 weeks, I would do a summative assessment, but the rest were formative. So, maybe we listen to a part of a Duolingo podcast and I have them go ahead and submit their answers. And then we check them together. So I have the submitted answers and it's a formative. I'm going to give them all credit for having tried to do the answers, but it lets me see like who's not understanding yet or who needs a little more support when we do listening activities. So I feel like that's a way that I still get the grades in the grade book, but having it be a formative assessment and for just a completion grade lets them not suffer for not being ready, to produce at end of unit level.
Right.
Sure. So then, do you ever find that, because I know each school district has different requirements and they weigh their grade books differently. Do you feel that by testing every 3 or 4 weeks that you have, one, sufficient enough evidence to justify the student's score, their overall grade, and two, that there isn't more in one category than another so that it I suppose what would be the word, it inflates the grade or that it does not represent the grade as best as it could?
Well, I think that you have to go back to that proficiency level idea that, if we know nationally that students in reading and listening are maybe getting to that intermediate mid-level, I mean, we set the bar so high sometimes that we think that students have to be able to read El Cid by the end of 4 years of Spanish to show that they are proficient. And that is an advanced, superior level text. And so just, sort of getting our goals in line with what they're able to do. But I do not make sure that every category has the same number. My level 1 and 2 students, I lean very heavily on interpretive mode. And so they do much more reading and listening than they do writing and speaking. As we move through the end of that level 2 year, we're doing more speaking and production because they have more input in them.
Yes.
And then when we move up into the upper levels, we do speaking. I mean, speaking and listening is part of every day of our classroom. So I don't need to assess that as much. I can tell you by what they write and speak, whether or not they understood what was happening in the class. So.
Right. And you can also, if you need evidence, like if you feel like you're going to need evidence to justify their grades, you can kind of informally keep track of your observations. If they're doing a little interpersonal activity in class, you can just kind of walk around. The kids that might be kind of on the borderline who are struggling, especially those kids who are struggling but trying. Those are the kids that really end up on my radar the most. Because I know that they are putting an effort into it, but still not quite hitting the mark that they're aiming for. So those are the kids that you can kind of make a point to just spend a little extra time near them, keep an eye on what they're doing when they're doing whatever activity in class, and just give them some extra feedback, things that you're noticing about their performance just throughout the semester. It doesn't have to be anything formal, but your kids. I mean, you interact with them every day. And if you've got your eye on certain specific kids, I mean, you're going to have, it might not be like data in your computer, but who puts that data in the computer anyway? It's you.
Right.
So like you're in charge as long as you know what their progress has looked like and you've been tracking it and they've been hearing feedback from you. You should have your bases covered, I would think.
Okay.
And our level ones, I mean, we want our level ones to all make an A. Like that is our goal at school. Now, they don't all make an A because not everybody will. We do everything together inside the classroom and they still don't always turn in the papers. Like, you can't drag every horse to the water. So we really are trying, but some of the horses are very reluctant. But we want them to feel that success so that they'll stay in, because I have level 4s that are just novice high. They're putting together some sentences, but I've noticed, like, now we're in the second semester of level 4, and 2 of my kids that have struggled to put together a series of sentences and get to that intermediate low did it on the last test. And so, you know, they wouldn't have ever gotten to that point had they dropped out after level 1.
Sure.
You know, that was
Absolutely.
that point reminds me, like, something that I always struggled with. I feel like for my entire career I struggled with this. When you've got those kids that continue taking the language year after year, they're just sweethearts and you love them and they want to be there and you want to have them there, but they're just never quite meeting the mark that you've set. And I always really had a hard time with, I wanted to give them a better grade because they were just so darn dedicated. But at the same time, like, you do at some point have to show that you're acquiring language in order to get that top grade. And I always really had a hard, I guess grades just stink inherently. Really, it kind of stinks that we even have to evaluate them, because they were improving at their own pace.
Absolutely.
But they were just never going to be an A student, probably never even going to be a B student, some of them. And so there were times when I would have to have, like, a little reality talk with them, like, you know, I would love for you to continue on, but you've got to know that unless you make some pretty big strides, you're probably not going to be able to get higher than a C in Spanish 4, you know. So I didn't want to be I wanted to be transparent with them, but at the same time I wanted them to stay. So that was always an internal struggle that I had.
Yeah. So one of my other questions for you ladies is that for those of us that have to have a certain number of assessments in the gradebook by the end of the term, and we have to have maybe, let's say, 2 or 3 pieces of evidence per category, because that's assessing quite a bit. How long and challenging should these assessments be? You know, I mean, they can't be a 50 question test necessarily, like we maybe would have done in the past. And what do these assessments need to look like in order to capture the evidence that we're looking for, but also not overwhelm both the students and us as the teachers by giving us 12 hours of grading to do?
I can tell you in the first paragraph of what somebody has written what proficiency score they would get if they turned that in on the Apple exam. Like, there are just markers, like using transition words and using the bigger vocab, the new vocab from the unit, and being able to place themselves, like, oh, this was a prompt about what did you do, and to say some of the verbs in the past tense. Like, those are things that probably by 4 sentences in. So I don't necessarily think that having a larger assessment makes our assessment of them any more accurate. As teachers, we spend every day in the classroom with those students, and we have a pretty good handle on where they are proficiency wise all the time, because we see them every day. We just know what they're dealing with. So I think, if you need 3 listening grades every midterm, every third day, just as you're finishing up the class, do a quick listening quiz and give them 5 facts about the reading and have them tell you what it means, or do true or false. Keep little exit tickets near the door so you can pop those out. What I really like about those little tiny assessments is that they do them for 5 points where everything else is 20 points, and then the kids' grades on them show you how they're doing. It's kind of a formative wrapped, and if you have to have summative grades, like if you have to not give all formative grades, it gives you a chance to see, oh, well, half the class we've been working on this Yora cries, and half the class didn't use that at all in their answers. So I know maybe I need to go back and use that more. So.
Yeah. I don't think an assessment at all has to be lengthy. And I think, kind of like I was saying earlier with my formative assessments, you can assess you can assess something summatively, just like one skill or one mode at a time, you know. So you could just have them do a really quick, like, here's a picture that represents some things that we've been talking about lately, and I want you to record yourself describing this picture. And then you could count that as a formative assessment or a summative assessment. To me, the difference is just the stakes of the assessment. They don't really have to look different from each other. It's just one is going to be worth more of a grade.
Well, so
And
then
we do, and this may be
Go ahead,
this
Karen.
may be terrifying to other people, but we do our speaking grades as basically, if you complete the task, you get an A. We know that speaking on our national testing, speaking is just barely over the intermediate low. Intermediate lows are still in a range where my teacher can understand me, but even a native speaker accustomed to language learners can't necessarily understand me. So they have a lot of pauses. They have, using an English word maybe in there. They're not good at circumlocution yet. So when we give them some kind of a speaking assessment, we tell them you've got 90 seconds, record this for 90 seconds, or I'm setting a timer and you're talking with your group for 90 seconds. But then the pressure is off me to spend a lot of time listening to them, because I can listen to just a few seconds and know, whether they've completed the task. That's really their goal, is to complete this task in the best language that you can. And some talk nonstop for 90 seconds and some pause a lot and think a lot, but they still fill the 90 seconds.
Right. Another thing that I really worked well for me is I pretty much always offered the opportunity to do a redo. So like if they just, let's say, had a nervous meltdown because they were so nervous about having to speak, sometimes it's easier for them to come and just speak face to face with me instead of recording themselves. Or, maybe I had them talking in a small group and there were kids in the group that they didn't like, and so they didn't want to talk. And, so sometimes just giving them the chance, like if you feel like there were other factors that affected your ability to do this task and you want to show me, have a second chance to show me. I was always very receptive to that. And, really 9 out of 10 kids are not even going to take you up on it. So it always seems like it would be so overwhelming to let kids do redos. But the vast majority of kids, either they know they did the best they could do and they're not going to be able to do any better than that, or they don't care enough to try to redo it. So you're really going to have that handful of kids that usually they're kids that have some kind of either high anxiety or some kind of social issue going on, or they're just the kid that, like, they get a 96 but they have to have a 100.
Yeah, have to have a 100.
Those two. Yeah. So to me that was and that also was a way that I could kind of justify what I was doing to parents. If a parent was unhappy with something, I can always say, well, I have opportunities for them. Yeah, they can redo any assessment, and they did not choose to redo any of their assessments. So, I'm not sure what to tell you about that. So that worked really well for me.
Well, and so then, I guess then on that note, do you have certain stipulations that you require before a student is required to or can retake an assessment? So, for example, hey, student who wants to retake, have you completed all your homework? Or have you done the reading? Or have you done X, Y, and Z? Because I guess when I think about giving them the opportunity to retake, I do have some students that I feel would abuse that, and they would say, oh, well, I know that I can retake this anyway, so I'm just going to do whatever on this first one, and I don't have to prepare for it, and then I can kind of see how it's going to be set up. So do you have stipulations for the students in order to retake?
We do 2 different, like if they're going to retake, they have a different prompt and they have to come on their own time. And so I feel like for us, our school district just has a policy that students, if it was important enough for them to do it the first time and they didn't do it, or they didn't do as well as they wanted to, if they want to redo it again, then they should be able to redo it again. And so, but I think that since it's on their own time, and since they can't just look at the test and then say, oh, I'm just going to go home and study this, it does help. I don't feel like that has influenced kids to be more apt to goof off the first time.
Honestly, I've tried different things. Our school went to a formative, summative grading policy. Gosh, it probably was like 12, 13 years ago. It was quite a while ago. And so we were very strongly encouraged to offer kids retakes. So I tried all kinds of different policies, and I found that it didn't really matter what my policy was. The same kids were the ones doing the retake, whether I made them jump through a whole bunch of hoops or not. There really were not a lot of kids that just took the test as a practice and then relied on taking the retake. And I did sometimes, if I had a kid that just wasn't doing anything at all in class, I felt fine saying to them, I feel like if you're going to take up my time after school to do a retake, I feel like I'd like to see all of your assignments completed before we actually sit down and do this again after school. So I think that's fine too. If you just feel like a kid has just not been engaging with the material and that's why they didn't do well, I think by all means, make them go back and engage with whatever you've been doing in class and then allow them to come in. I didn't feel bad about making special requirements for individuals because I was already being nice by allowing them to do the retake in the first place.
Yes.
And we also do, on our speaking and writing assessments, we are very frequently do a choice board. So we just finished reading Vector in Spanish 4. And at the end of Vector, their choice exam was that if they wanted to take a B- as their maximum possible grade, they could give me just 12 facts that they know about the reader. Like, if they were great facts, awesome sentences, then they'd get a B-. But if they, if it was trash, then it's not going to be a B-. For the B, they could retell their favorite part of the story. You still have to perform, but now you have to retell it like a story. So I'm going to have to see those paragraphs because you're only a novice high if you're writing me 12 sentences. To be an intermediate low, you have to write me some paragraphs. For the A, the solid A, they had to tell me who their favorite character was and why, using evidence from the text. So now they have to kind of give me an introduction and conclusion. So this is my favorite character because, and then these are the 3 body paragraphs, and this is the conclusion. And then for the A+, if they wanted to get the 25 out of 25 or 26 out of 25, they wrote comparing Vector to any other book or movie or TV show that they had ever seen. Like, they had to come up with their own connections and compare and contrast. And so I had maybe 5 or 6 in each class that went for the A+. A big chunk of them went for the favorite character, and then the ones that are kind of treading water in there went for writing sentences or for just retelling a part of the story. So it kind of helped me justify my grade because they chose where they wanted to be, and they don't have to retake because they prepared for what they felt like they were comfortable doing in the first place.
And the beauty of that too is you can use that assessment with like literally any unit you're teaching.
Yes, absolutely.
So I love stuff like that. That's so flexible.
In the lower levels.
Yeah.
In level 3, the A+ is to talk about the favorite character and why, because that really makes them, break it into the introduction, conclusion, the 3 reasons from the text. And in our level 1s and 2s, when they do write, level 1 just retells story or makes sentences, and level 2 can compare and contrast. A lot of times in level 2, we watch a film alongside the reader, and so they compare and contrast the film then as the possible A+.
All right, Luke.
Wow.
We have time for one. We have time for one more quick question. Make it a good one.
Okay. So I
best
suppose
one.
The last question that I have is, do you believe assessments should have levels or gateways or tiers that students must master in order to receive the grade? So, for example, Carrie, you gave the idea of a choice board, which I love. But what I'm talking about is the student must complete the first section, which is something mechanical. And then if they want the next section could be something a little more meaningful. And then the last section is communicative. If the student can go ahead and do the communicative part, do they need to do the mechanical and the meaningful in order to get the full grade? Do you believe that assessments need to be tiered, or that there need to be gateways in order to assess them appropriately?
Ooh, that's a really good
I don't-
question.
I don't think so. And it's interesting because there are two different in Illinois, we do the Seal of Biliteracy, and there are two different kind of main tests for the Seal of Biliteracy. Avant has their stamp assessment, and ACTFL has their Apple assessment. I've given the stamp and I've given the Apple. My kids perform the same either way. The stamp exam is tiered. They take the listening and then they take the reading, and those determine what they're going to write about and what they're going to speak about, because however they perform, then the prompts that they receive, and it's intuitive. If they can't answer this question, it backs down a little bit. If they do answer it, it goes a little higher on the listening and reading. So it sort of self-sorts them. But then the Apple exam is just the same for everybody. Everybody takes the same test, answers the same reading and writing prompts, and my scores don't differ that much between the two. So I feel like assessment isn't really making any difference at all in the way that our students perform. So I think if you need, like, if your department needs the grades and you have to have, this is the mechanical part, can you understand these, can you translate these, and then this is the cultural part, like, did you get the meat of the unit, and now let's communicate about it. Do it for the for the spots in the grade book. You want to appease everybody in your department. But if you don't have to, I don't think assessment and how we assess ever has any effect on how their proficiency works out in the end.
100%. All right. Well, that just about wraps up our time for today. So, Luke, thank you so much for reaching out, and I hope that you'll keep in touch with any other questions that you have. This has been so awesome. You are our first guest that we've ever had, so that was really cool. And for all of you out there listening, please send us your questions, tweet at us at CI Diaries, send us email at cidiaries@waysidepublishing.com. We would love to hear from you. We promise we will not force you to come on our podcast, but we would love to answer any questions that you might have.
Don't tell them.
Secret.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you so much. Have a great day.